So where do we go from here? And I know you want to share some things about where we might go from here. And I'm curious in your view, and it seems to me some of the interviewees that we brought into the network is that there's vaccine injuries, and in many cases the vaccines are compromising immune systems and allowing pre-existing conditions to flourish. And so there's higher increased rates of cancers and things of that nature, but all indications seems like across the board, there's just less of a defensive immune system to hold them back.
Yes.
And we've talked previously, in fact, recently with Dr. Paul Harch about this whole inflammatory issue, and you just touched on the whole gene therapy part of it, the regulation of our genes and these enzymes for anti-inflammatory being upregulated and inflammatory downregulated and things of that nature. Do you see an opportunity for hyperbaric oxygen to help in those areas? Is it clear to you? I'm curious.
Well, it's the most exciting thing that has really piqued my interest in this field, which I had been a part of in a clinical way some years ago. Had not been involved in the research about it, but of course this is what has come to my attention recently with the assistance of my colleague and friend, Dr. Ted Fogarty, and his work with Dr. Harch. So the work that they've done has been extraordinarily stimulating to me, because it does exactly hold a potential and a promise for being able to address some of these injuries. I can't say that I'm familiar exactly with the literature yet about this. As with many things in medicine, we start out with anecdotal reports. In other words, we see people who have actually improved with a course of therapy for their particular conditions, which there are many we see now related either to the so-called long COVID or to the post-vaccination symptomatology that people develop. So there's a lot of anecdotal evidence and increasing numbers of, and we expect to see there will be more actually published reports of the progress in this area. It is sort of a renewal, it is a renaissance in this field as I see it, because there are huge numbers of people who are involved now that potentially could be helped by this form of therapy. And so I find it very exciting to be at least brought into this again at this later stage of my career, which has made it very interesting for me to contemplate.
One of the more recent occurrences is the frontline doctors, similar to the three young ladies, as you stated, that started the Freedom.
It's called Voices for Freedom.
Voices for Freedom in New Zealand. Frontline doctors very active in a lot of what you're doing and promoting the truth about what the science is telling us. And I think you put it kindly that they might take the science and set it aside, and that's basically burying it and not giving it any credibility. And it's unfortunate because these are brilliant scientists without conflict of interest or motives for what they're saying. They're simply looking at what the science is telling them and using their expertise to advise us. And so with all that said, to me, this parallel that I was educated in hyperbaric oxygen somewhat as a structural engineer, to me it was high school biology or college biology that led me to understand it and to start reading these studies, these clinical trials, some peer-reviewed, and really understanding some of the conflicts that could exist even within that it wasn't good science because there was a conflict and there was sort of a predetermined conclusion, up front, and that's what they were out to prove. And some of them become more clear as you read more and more of them. And that is that this suppression of science has raised the awareness of this conflict of interest. That is, we won't talk about what the intent is because that's a slippery slope on what the intent is.
Yep.
But it's something that hyperbaric oxygen seems to have suffered from for, to me, going back, it's nearly 100 years. Because back to Cunningham, the Cunningham ball, which people should be aware of. The Cunningham ball back in Cleveland, Ohio, was a 5-story hyperbaric chamber, and the amazing results. And the medical industry just completely destroyed this poor guy. And so I think the fact that this can happen, and they're going after you for raising awareness about it, lends credibility to the fact that this could have been happening for a very long period of time.
And I think that's absolutely true. I mean, if we look back to the establishment of the American medical schools after the Flexner Report in the early 1910s, this was actually a report, an analysis of the medical schools existing in the United States at the time, funded by Mr. Rockefeller, who is a holder of the petroleum products that were used as the basis for pharmaceuticals. And the result of this Flexner Report was the closing down of many of the, what we would call today, naturopathic schools of medicine, or those which related to even homeopathy and some of these other areas that are now considered to be alternative or non-traditional medicine techniques. And you have to wonder, why is it that that all ended up happening, where those schools that were shut down were the ones that dealt with natural products, and the ones that were formulated and allowed to exist were those that used pharmaceutical-based products, and only pharmaceutical-based products, and surgery and radiation and all of that. Conflict of interest, once again, has been with us for a long time.
Yeah, where would we be if medicine was not, just focused on what's best for the patient and not going down that path? And so anyhow, we're bringing awareness, and so I think it would be great for anyone listening to this would get on, listen to some of your podcasts. Sounds to me like you have a rich understanding of it, and can really help to educate them on some things that are really important moving forward in avoiding some of the mistakes that we make by putting all of our trust in things we're dealing with political motivated, science denying individuals, and it's not just in New Zealand or in the U.S. I think it's a global issue. It is a global issue, and I'll just touch on that point just a bit in regard to why is it that American medicine is so dominated by Big Pharma. We know that there are only two countries in the world, until recently I was corrected, but perhaps classically two countries in the world allow direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising on television: the United States and New Zealand. Interesting. So why is that? And what is going to be different as a result of that? Let's contrast that to what happens in Ukraine. Now, my wife is Ukrainian, and so I've been in Ukraine a number of times, and I've actually been not only a colleague, but actually a participant in the Ukrainian medical system, as I had actually been hospitalized there for, a medical condition. Their approach to healthcare, being as it is, it's going to be somewhat compromised by the history and all of that as a Soviet country. But in many ways, they actually had much more of an interest in the nutritional and the food side of what makes a person healthy or diseased. It's not that they don't know about medicines, it's just that they put them in a proper context. And there's, once again, going back to the original statement that Hippocrates made, the original physician from more than 2,000 years ago: let food be thy medicine, let medicine be thy food. And so that whole idea that, we're going to be dependent upon pharmaceutical products, whether it's drugs or vaccines or anything else, and deny the innate capability that we have to heal ourselves when we are given proper nutrition and proper food and all of the other things that are important, sleep and, stress relief and all of those things. That is something that seems to be taking us well down this unfortunate path that we see today with the decline in the health of American people. Crossover, just as a side note, that Russia, across the border there in the country of Russia, they have some 3,000 hyperbaric clinics or hospitals throughout the country. So heavily used and yep. And of course not influenced, certainly with television advertisements for some of the medications that are out there. And so coming back to your career as a pulmonologist, and I'm curious if you're aware of this, that back in the mid-90s, maybe 93, earlier to mid-90s, that the American Heart Association endorsed hyperbaric oxygen as a therapy for people suffering or recently having suffered from a heart attack, that their hearts would heal in 1/3 of the time. They endorsed it. And at some point shortly after that, I'm not sure when, could be in years, but from where we are today in 2022, that was all pulled away. They hid it. So they took that endorsement and they put it on the shelf and said, okay, we're not going to do that. Were you aware of that they had endorsed that, or that there was a benefit there?
I was not aware of that, but I'm frankly not at all surprised. We've seen a number of other sort of alternative therapies over the years that have been squashed, and the people who provided them and who presented those, the research related to that, have been squashed like a bug by organized medicine and by, therefore, we assume, the huge pharmaceutical backing of organized medicine. We can look back at the statement that was made by two of the former editors of the New England Journal of Medicine, which is one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. And when Dr. Arnold Rillman finished his term there as the editor of the journal somewhere in the 90s, I think it was, he said, well, I had to look back and say, well, maybe all of the studies that we were publishing there had been unduly influenced by pharmaceutical companies. And in fact, maybe what we believed to be a correct conclusion may in fact, be open to suspicion. And after him, another editor, Marsha Angel, who was the next editor of the New England Journal, had concluded much the same. So this is not just something that's a fringe effect within, let's say, an alternative therapy like hyperbaric oxygen. It's even affected those studies that we assume are going to be reliable enough to produce an approval of new drugs and new agents. So the degree of corruption within the field of medicine and science in general has just been very disappointing for me to have to come to realize towards the end of my career now, having relied upon this for all the years that I was practicing, as being a reliable source of guidance on the use of medications.
One of the things that I think that in a way to guide the narrative, and so I think that the professionals that are in hyperbaric oxygen, the medical professionals, at some point they have that feeling, they're disappointed, they're concerned, they're somewhat disgusted, I would say, with where they got into this for a reason to heal people, and it seems like their hands are tied when it comes to something as simple as oxygen under pressure, as we say has been around since the second day. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when you see these commercials on television and you see this drug, very often you'll hear that one of the side effects could be inflammation. And so in some of the discussions with the doctors here, we go back about we all die of inflammation. It comes in different forms. Okay. That if you were going to take a medication that causes inflammation, why would you not pair that up with this natural anti-inflammatory therapy? And wouldn't that medication be much more effective if it wasn't causing inflammation and it could target what it was doing? So maybe there is a place, and that's sort of the soft approach. Well, maybe we should work together, and maybe you should be looking at this as a combination. And so there is that I'm sure clinics deal with. Patients come in and they have their list of medications they're on. So how does it affect those medications? And wouldn't it be great to have the studies that show you can take that medication while you do this, and not this sort of risk that is involved. If you as a clinician in a hyperbaric clinic don't say, look, you got to get off your medication before I do that.
Right.
That you could actually explore that. And so.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the way we're going to be able to make more of an approach into the conventional allopathic world, is to say, well, we're not replacing what you're doing, we're augmenting it. And by the way, let's see if it actually turns out that it's more effective than what you've been providing. And if you can do that on enough cases and enough studies and enough different indications, then perhaps there's a capacity for inroads. But I think what happens is that it may be that the benefit of hyperbaric therapy, whether with oxygen or even without it, as we're now seeing in some of these low-pressure hyperbaric treatment centers, what you may find is that the actual treatment itself can be so effective that it really will threaten, the drug-oriented world that we have been trained in as physicians. And when you threaten, to take away, the drug companies effectively their bread and butter, then you can count on being, you can count on having, fake studies published, that show that it's ineffective or whatever it's going to be. I would just like to say, hey, let's do the science here. Let's do the science here. Let's design some studies that show the difference between using a drug-only model for a given series of indications and one which is a drug and a hyperbaric model and in a hyperbaric model. I mean, that's how you would like to do that, and you'd like to do it in sufficient numbers that you can gain statistical significance, and then you'd like to see it published in not an obscure journal, but in a major journal. But the problem is we've seen with the vaccine scene, the vaccination scene, and with some of the studies that have been showing adverse effects, is that they're not only not published in the major journals, they are specifically rejected by the major journals. Yeah. It's not as though people have not tried to get this groundbreaking information, and adverse to the narrative, we have to say, this actually challenges the narrative. They're not allowed to be published in the journals where they're going to have the most impact. Mm-hmm. And so, Dr. Pierre Corey has had on his recent Substack blog, where he describes just what happened with respect to the treatment of some of these, shall we call them repurposed drugs for COVID-19 infection. And what happened when various journal articles were sent to be published that had gone through peer review. And he just goes through the whole scenario of the corruption that has allowed the rejection of these time after time after time after time, even good studies that should have been known by the general public and should have been picked up and actually acted upon by those who are in positions of authority within our government.
Well, to me, it seems that, there is the solution out there that you have this functional medicine, where they're coming up with therapies like hyperbaric oxygen, you have IV therapies, you have the electromagnetic flux, the beamer, saunas, so things of that nature, ozone therapy. There's a list of them. I've been unable to find anything that's more comprehensive than hyperbaric oxygen. It's really more about dosing, and that's where that focus needs to go on the dosing, like the low pressure, higher pressures, wound care. Yep. Then it's a matter of coming up with the right protocol, for this. And then you have the Western medicine side, which is just drugs, taught in medical schools and all that. Yep. And now we have this emergence of this integrative medicine, where they're integrating both. Mm-hmm. And so looking for the right solution. Clearly, antibiotics have a place if you can't get rid of the infection. And so that Western medicine, antibiotics that have been around since penicillin, very important, right? So there's some really important things there. So we can't just reject that entirely. So there's that's where we should be, right? We should just be looking at everything and deciding what's best for humanity. And so it's the spirit of humanity that needs to be embraced here, is it not?
It is. Talking about integrative medicine, I mean, it's interesting to me that in New Zealand, our group of, what should we call them, dissidents that believe still that we need to talk about informed consent, we need to talk about, potential injuries. This is a group which is called New Zealand Doctors Speaking Out with Science, also available online as nzdsos.com. And this is a group that has been in the forefront of publishing the necessary information for our people in New Zealand. This is effectively the New Zealand equivalent to the frontline doctors that we have in the United States. So my colleague there, Dr. Matt Chilton, is an integrative physician and has been for many years. And he also was one to speak out quite broadly, and was my colleague in the court case that we went to in Wellington District Court back in February, when our licenses were suspended for speaking things they didn't want us to talk about. And the whole idea is that integrative medicine is an approach that we need to be looking at. Most of the members, or at least many of the members of this organization, this NZDSOS, are in fact either alternative medical practitioners or integrative and so forth. They've had already been in tune with the idea that we need to get beyond drugs and pharmaceutical products only. So this is not it's not a new idea, it's an old idea. Mm. It's just an old idea that is becoming much and more relevant as we see the corruption of the pharmaceutical-based approach to medical practice.
Or is it the pharmaceutical-based approach to politics?
They're intertwined, aren't they? I mean, because we have to imagine that, our legislators and all of that are they really doing what's best for the people, or are they doing, are they being unduly influenced by, the pharmaceutical companies through, well, good old-fashioned lobbying and that sort of thing. And so, that it leaves us as the people, it leaves us in a bad frame of mind.
Well,
really.
anybody that's squashing debate is not out for the benefit of all. They're not.
That's right. And so, I mean, when I see somebody being shut down, I say, well, I want to go there. I want to find out what they're talking about, because, truth will out eventually. And you can only squash truth for so long. And yes, you have, you can exert great political power to shut people up, but the truth will out. It will be known, even if it takes a long time for that to happen. Increasingly, more and more people are becoming awake to the fact that, things aren't what they've been told. More and more people now have personal understanding, relations, either friends, colleagues, or whatever, that have suffered from real injuries related to this inoculation product. And so, as our approach is in hyperbaric oxygen network, is to actually let people know that there is a solution for this. Let's sort of try to get that out into the public arena, so that people can know, yes, okay, we're suffering, but is there a solution to this? And this, I think, is going to be a major potential offering to help a lot of these people.
Well, Dr. Canaday, we certainly appreciate your insights, and it's a worthy cause, is it not? And your work, in being attacked, is it's not uncommon, I guess, in countries around the world where doctors are speaking up, and we certainly appreciate your courage to do that and to fight the battle that needs to be fought on many fronts. And coming here from New Zealand and stopping in to see us has been a great pleasure of mine, and wonderful to meet you and have this opportunity, and hope, when you're back next summer, or is it this summer that you get to come back here? Maybe you run through here, and we can get an update and see how things are going in New Zealand. I know that New Zealand is in the news, and we hear a lot about what's going on there, more on the political side of things, and then of course when they shut the country down. So again, thank you so much for visiting us, and appreciate all your insights.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Have a safe trip home.
Thank you.